Everybody's been talking about the red-hot housing markets in Toronto and Vancouver for quite a while, but now it looks like the mania is spreading to cottage country. According to one Muskoka realtor, supply has dropped 28% and the average price rose over $150,000 last year. Rob Serediuk is cottage realtor and Cottage Life TV host. He joins us from Barrie, Ontario to tell us about how spring and cottage country real estate is shaping up. Rob, it is great to see you. I know you're busy for all the reasons I just said because there's a lot of stuff going on, but just how hot is the cottage market right now?
You know what, Kim? It is the best that I've seen it in a long, long time. But I will say you have to remember in cottage country, it all depends on the price bracket that you're in and the area that you're in. Okay,
so let's talk a bit about when you say the best, give me a little color around that. When what price buckets and what areas are you talking about?
So, you know, at the end of the day, there's kind of that average price point in each area. So, for instance, the average price point in Muskoka so far this year is $680,000. And we're really seeing that bread and butter price point being very, very competitive. Halliburton, where, you know, I own my brokerage, it is doing amazing in the up to about $800,000. Over in BC, they're starting to see the same types of things where that average selling price is really what's drawing the buyers in. When you get outside of the average selling price, that's where things get a little bit more tricky.
Okay, what do you mean by tricky?
Well, you know, I mean, there's certain areas where there is, you know, listings that are well above the average price. You know, it's not like Toronto. We can't take a number and say, you know, the average selling price is like $900,000 and everything is kind of selling around there. So depending on what market you're in, whether it's in BC or even to the East Coast, the more you're above the average selling price, the longer it's going to take to sell and find the right buyer.
Give us a sense of just how much more things are going for, though, in general. I mean, and again, I understand what you're saying. There's no such thing as a national real estate market, let alone a national cottage market, and I know that. But, you know, in the kind of popular buckets, are you seeing like 10, 15, 20% higher than last year? Like, what kind of price inflation are you seeing?
I would say on average, we can look at about 10 to 15%,
really?
Which is really, really good.
And what kind of supply? Because I know one thing that's been happening in Toronto, and I mean, we talked to an economist about this, is that people can't afford to buy, so they're just staying put and renovating. Are you seeing things like that happen in cottage country too?
Well, you know, it's really interesting today looking at the news coming out of Toronto with all of a sudden inventory increasing because we have the opposite problem in cottage country right now, and that's lack of inventory. Again, it depends on the price category, but there certainly seems to be people holding back putting their cottages on the market. I found today's news about the Toronto market and all of a sudden this influx of inventory, very interesting, and I hope we're going to see the same thing up here because we have buyers lined up.
I was going to ask, because one thing that happened, obviously, is we had the announcement of a tax, a foreign buyer's tax, and obviously that's going to put some different dynamic into the Toronto market, but that wouldn't apply to cottage country, I'm assuming. So, I mean, does that influence what's happening up there?
No, I mean, you know, I know it had a pretty significant impact in BC. I don't think we're going to see it have any impact in cottage country. And I don't even know if we're really going to see it have that big of an impact in the GTA because the percent of foreign buyers are so low. You know, in general, the people that are buying cottages are people that live, you know, in and around the areas.
Let me ask you, I know that you were talking with one of my producers earlier and you had a few trends I wanted to ask you about. And actually, while we're doing that, I'm going to ask everyone to put up some pictures of some of these gorgeous cottages that just went up for sale and what we got for them. But buyer gridlock. So what I heard, one thing you talked about is that people can't afford to upgrade or they can't upgrade their home in the city, so they're buying a cottage instead.
Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting because today on the news, they were talking about cashing out. And I could have told you that about 8 weeks ago. I would say about 50% of my buyers are people that own homes in the GTA. You know, they're in their like late 50s to early 60s, and they are cashing out and they're coming to cottage country to buy. Also, what I have a lot of are young families who are actually kind of stuck in the place that they're in the GTA. They've got equity in their home, and they're using that equity to tap in and buying a vacation property.
Interesting. Also, I heard that
it is interesting.
People can't afford to buy income properties in the city, so now they're looking at income properties again in cottage country.
Absolutely. In fact, I would say that, the demand for rental properties is huge. So a lot of my buyers want listings that are already have a really good rental history, and they're jumping on top of those because it really will help them, with carrying costs and the mortgage. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of my buyers say to me, listen, I get 4 weeks vacation. I'm only going to use 2 of them to be at my cottage. I'm not going to let it sit there all year round. So I'm going to rent it out. And it's a huge trend. And, staycations are becoming more and more popular, especially with, what's going on down south in our dollar. So that is probably one of the biggest trends that I see, especially in the younger set of buyers.
Rob, I've only got about 30 seconds, and I'm saying this knowing full well that you're going to be biased in what you say here. But, do you think cottages are a good investment for people right now? I mean, in terms of income or, is that a good place where you think to put your money?
I would say so, yes. I mean, again, I think you need to be very cautious of the area that you're buying in and understand the market and understand that each market is unique onto its own. But yes, I would say at this point, cottages are a very good investment.
Rob, sorry, one last question for you. I mean, is there any kind of area you think that is really interesting that perhaps hasn't been, hasn't been discovered yet, or are we way past that point now?
I think we're kind of past that point now, Kim. I mean, buyers are looking like, on Sunday, I took a buyer from Muskoka all the way down to North Kawartha. It took me 3 hours to get from property A to property B. But, at the end of the day, Halliburton is my favorite.
All right, Rob, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kim. Have a good night.
You too. Rob Serediuk, he's a cottage realtor and Cottage Life TV host.